The alarm blared at 5:43 a.m., 4 minutes before Faith Morales planned to wake up. But in truth, she had opened her eyes long before that, staring at the stain on the ceiling, shaped like a broken bird's wing, listening to the steady beat of her own heart in a room so small that even her breath echoed. This one-room apartment in the West End was cold. The heater had been broken for weeks, and every call to the management office only brought back a polite reminder about the overdue rent. Faith carefully slipped out from the mattress laid directly on the floor, pulling the thin blanket back over her daughter Lily, her 7-year-old girl, curled up in one of Faith's old hoodies. Faith moved to the corner of the kitchen, which was really just a crooked counter where the electric burner and the mini fridge coexisted. She pulled out a cheap loaf of bread, sliced 2 thin pieces, then wrapped them around the last piece of cheese, splitting the meager breakfast between the 2 of them. "Mummy, can I have the bigger piece of cheese today?" Lily asked, her innocent brown eyes glowing with hope. Faith smiled softly, nodding. "You need to grow strong, don't you, princess?" A moment of silence passed as Faith watched her daughter's radiant smile, feeling both joy and a sharp ache in her chest, because even a slice of cheese had become a luxury in this life. When Faith held Lily's hand and stepped out into the winter morning, the wind lashed across the grey streets. They walked past tall buildings, watching people in crisp suits hurry into taxis while Faith and Lily walked 3 blocks to the bus stop. Under the shelter of the bus stop, a man lay curled up in an old blanket, his grey hair tangled, his scruffy beard untrimmed, the heels of his shoes worn through. People walked past him as if he didn't exist, or like he was just another cold gust of wind they didn't want to feel. Lily tugged on Faith's hand, whispering, "Mommy, why does he have to sleep out here?" Faith answered softly, "Because sometimes life is very hard, sweetheart. Can we help him?" That question hung in Faith's mind all day long as she worked at the cafe in the business district, wiping down tables for wealthy customers sipping $7 lattes, while she herself counted every penny to buy dinner for Lily. That night, as Faith packed the loaf of bread for the next day, she tore off a small piece, wrapped it in a napkin, and set it aside. She didn't know then that this small decision would change her life forever. The next day, Faith held Lily's hand as they walked quickly over the freezing sidewalk, her worn canvas shoes splashing through puddles left by the previous night's rain. Inside her old backpack, the small piece of bread was carefully wrapped in a crumpled napkin, a portion meant for the homeless man whose name she did not know. They arrived at the bus stop. The man was still there, wrapped in the dark, old blanket, curled up like a dry leaf in the wind. Faith hesitated, her heart pounding with fear that he might react badly, or that others would give her strange looks. She gently placed the small bundle of bread beside him, then quickly turned away, pulling Lily along, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Mommy, did you just give him food?" Lily asked, her eyes sparkling. Faith smiled, bent down, and touched Lily's nose gently. "Yes, just a little bit. Honey, sometimes sharing a little with someone can help them feel warmer. Like when you gave me the bigger piece of cheese, right?" Faith paused for a moment, feeling those innocent words peel back every silent sacrifice she had made. She squeezed Lily's hand and nodded. "That's right, sweetheart. On the bus." Faith sat quietly, her gaze drifting out through the fogged-up window. Buildings passed by, strangers absorbed in their phone screens, while Faith thought about the man, his face hidden beneath tangled grey hair, his calloused hands, and the silence surrounding him like an invisible coat. Does he have anyone waiting for him? Did someone once love him? Faith wondered, as the image of the small piece of bread appeared in her mind. Warm, but so little against the cold out there. That day at the cafe, Faith made coffee for a man in a suit, wearing an expensive watch, eyes locked on his phone as he swiped his card to pay for a cappuccino worth 3 of Faith and Lily's meals. Faith bowed her head in thanks as always, but inside, a question rose up. Did that man outside ever sit in a cafe, drinking hot coffee, with someone calling his name softly? That night, Faith returned to the small apartment, finding Lily asleep on the floor mattress, still clutching the old, frayed teddy bear. Faith looked at her daughter, fear welling up inside her, a fear that one day her own daughter would face the cold indifference of the world, the averted eyes of strangers. She stood silently, then moved to the table, preparing the bread for tomorrow. Her hands paused as she looked at the small piece she had just torn off. She wrapped it carefully, set it aside, sighed, and whispered to herself, "I'll bring it again tomorrow, as long as he's still there." Faith didn't know that in the dark corner of the bus stop, the homeless man had opened his eyes as she walked away. Those deep, dark eyes reflected the streetlight, following the figures of Faith and Lily as they faded from view. And in those eyes, a fragile light glimmered quietly in a world too used to turning away. The next morning, Faith woke with a start as pale light streamed through the thin curtains, the clock reading 5:45 still before the alarm. Lily was still sleeping, her brown hair spread out, her small face rising and falling with each breath. Faith prepared quietly, her hands trembling as she tore the bread, this time giving the man a bigger piece. "It's just a piece of bread, but if he's hungry, maybe today will be a little less hard," she told herself, eyes stinging as she thought of the cold nights on the street. Outside, the fog hung low, cars leaving trails of grey exhaust in the freezing air. Faith held Lily's hand, walking quickly toward the bus stop, where the man still sat curled beneath the shelter, wrapped in a damp, thin blanket. Faith stopped, knelt down, and placed the bundle near him, this time not running away, but softly saying, "I don't have much, sir, but please take this to warm your stomach." The man opened his eyes, and for the first time, Faith saw them deep, sorrowful, but sharp, as if they had witnessed every hidden corner of this world. He looked at Faith, then glanced at Lily, who was holding her mother's hand, eyes wide. "Thank you," he said, his voice hoarse, small, but strangely warm. Faith smiled, nodding. "Mummy," he said, "thank you to you." Lily said joyfully as Faith came back to hold her hand. Faith squeezed Lily's hand. "Yes. See, a thank you can make a morning warmer." They stepped onto the bus, and Faith turned back, seeing the man still sitting there, holding the bundle of bread, watching them. That gaze stayed with Faith all day, while she wiped tables, took out the trash, made coffee, and in those fleeting moments between tasks, when she allowed herself a small sigh. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Faith sat by the window, looking out at the yellow street lights, holding a small slip of paper with the upcoming electricity payment due date. This month's paycheck would just cover rent, electricity, food, bus fare, and that was it. Nothing left for dreams. She remembered the man's eyes that morning, eyes that held gratitude, a longing to be seen as a human, not as a forgotten shadow on the sidewalk. Faith took a small piece of paper and quickly wrote, "Tomorrow, I will bring you more bread." She folded the note, placed it in her pocket, planning to give it with the bread the next day, not knowing if he could read or if he even wanted to. But she wanted him to know she saw him, not as invisible, but as a living human being. The next morning, Faith looked around but didn't see him at the bus stop. Her heart sank when she saw the empty spot where he usually lay, the old blanket gone. "Mommy, isn't he here anymore?" Lily asked, her voice sad. Maybe he found a warmer place. "Sweetheart," Faith said, but inside, worry twisted, fearing he had been chased away or that something had happened to him on the cold streets. All morning, Faith felt like a ghost, her eyes flicking toward the street every time the cafe door opened, hoping to catch a glimpse of him walking by, or at least a sign that he was okay. After her shift, Faith walked home instead of taking the bus, wandering through the dark streets, past awnings and alleys where the homeless lay curled in sleeping bags, her eyes searching, but in vain. When she reached the small apartment, Faith slumped down, tears falling as she pulled the note from her pocket. The note she had written for him, still there, never delivered. Lily came over, placing her small hand on her mother's shoulder. "Mommy, don't be sad. I know he's okay." Faith smiled, pulling her daughter into her arms, whispering, "Yes, baby. I hope so too, hope so." In that moment, Faith didn't know that just a few blocks away, inside a black car parked under the dim streetlights, the homeless man with the deep eyes was sitting silently, watching Faith and Lily through the fogged window, his eyes reflecting warmth and the beginning of a plan taking shape. 3 days passed, and Faith did not see the man at the bus stop again. Each morning, she carefully packed a small portion of bread, slipping it into her bag, her eyes scanning the dark corners under the shelter, the steps, the cold stone benches, but he was gone, leaving no trace. Faith began carrying the bread with her all day, nibbling on it when her stomach growled, but always saving half of it, as if keeping a silent promise to a stranger whose name she didn't even know. On the third evening, as she was washing cups at the cafe, the bell above the door jingled, and she looked up to see a man walking in. It wasn't the homeless man, but a middle-aged man, tall, neat, wearing a dark coat, salt and pepper hair cut short, his calm eyes scanning the cafe before landing on where Faith stood. "Hello, I'd like a hot Americano. Light on the sugar," the man said, his voice deep, each word clear, his gaze fixed on Faith. "Sure, coming right up." Faith smiled, but inside she felt something strange, a tension from the unusual attention that made her a little uneasy. As she prepared the coffee, she glanced over her shoulder and caught the man watching her, not with a judging stare, but with a quiet, deep observation. When Faith set the cup down on the table, he nodded slightly, saying softly, "Thank you, Faith." She froze, her hand trembling slightly. "I'm sorry, but how do you know my name?" He smiled gently, not answering immediately, and simply said, "You're a good person." Faith felt a flicker of confusion, her heart beating fast, the scent of hot coffee in the air stretching out the moment. She returned to the counter, trying to focus on cleaning, but her eyes kept drifting toward the man, her mind tangled with suspicion. That night, Faith wrapped Lily in the thin blanket, kissed her forehead gently, then sat by the window, looking out at the streetlights flickering over the rain puddles. She held the small note she hadn't managed to give away, her eyes stinging. Why am I caring so much about a stranger, when I can't even cover the electric bill or the rent? But then, the image of his eyes returned to her, the sad yet warm look, the small nod when he received the bread, the raspy "thank you." Faith closed her eyes, leaning her head against the window frame, letting out a long breath. "Because I see him, because I know he's a person, just like me." The next morning, Faith stepped out of the apartment, Lily holding her hand, looking up and smiling. "It's such a beautiful day today, Mommy." It truly was. The sky was clearer, sunlight slipping through the buildings, pushing away the usual damp fog. Faith felt a small lightness in her chest, even with the many worries waiting for her. At the bus stop, Faith stopped, her eyes widening. The man had returned. He was sitting on the steps leading down to the subway, his old blanket draped over his shoulders, his face now visible beneath his grey hair. He looked straight at Faith, giving a small nod. Faith stepped forward, pulling the bread from her bag, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it in front of him. "I didn't know where you went these past few days. I was worried." He reached out to take it, his eyes meeting Faith's with a gentle look. "Thank you. Not many people care about a nobody." Faith let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "You're not a nobody. I don't know your name, but I see you." He was silent for a moment before softly saying, "My name is David." Faith's smile bloomed, the first real, unguarded smile in a long time. "I'm Faith, and this is Lily, my daughter." David looked at Lily, a strange spark lighting up his eyes. "Hello, Lily." Lily grinned. "I hope you stay warm today." David nodded, his raspy voice warm. "I hope so too. As they boarded the bus, Faith looked back to see David slowly opening the bundle of bread, his eyes following them, then lifting to the sky, a faint smile crossing his weathered face. Faith pulled Lily into her arms, a strange warmth seeping into her heart, as if for the first time in many long months. She no longer felt like she was fighting alone in this cold city. She didn't know that from across the street. The man from the cafe the day before was standing, watching them, his eyes holding a quiet satisfaction before he turned and walked away, his phone buzzing lightly in his hand. That day, Faith left for work earlier, clutching the strap of her cheap bag, inside still holding the loaf of bread with a piece torn off, the rest saved for David, the homeless man she had called by name for the first time yesterday. David. The name echoed in Faith's mind, carrying a strange closeness, as if she had known him for a long time, as if he had become a small piece of her small, worry-filled world. That morning, Faith made coffee faster than usual, wiped down the counters until they gleamed, lined up the glass cups neatly on the shelf. As she bent down to place a box in the storage room, the bell above the door jingled again. Faith lifted her head. It was the man in the dark coat from the other day. The same steady walk, the calm, determined eyes, the deep, warm voice. One hot Americano. Light on the sugar. Please. Faith nodded, turning away, but her heart was beating fast again. She remembered how he had said her name the other day, the way he observed her, the words, "You're a good person," lingering in the air. When Faith set the cup on the table, he nodded. "Thank you." Faith. Faith pressed her lips together, summoning her courage. "I'm sorry, but I don't remember ever telling you my name." He smiled, lifting his gaze to meet hers, his deep brown eyes calm. "I know your name because I've been watching you for some time. Don't worry, it's not for a bad reason." Faith stepped back slightly, her hand tightening around the cleaning rag. He continued, "My name is Matthew Reed." Faith stood silent for a few seconds, her eyes studying the man before her, before she finally managed to say, "Why?" Matthew took a sip of his coffee, setting the cup down, his eyes never leaving Faith's. "Because there are people in this city who still know how to see a human being, not just trash or a nuisance on the sidewalk." Faith froze, Matthew's words striking a tender place inside her. She thought of David, of his eyes, of the words she had told him. "You're not a nobody." Matthew left the money for the coffee, the tip double the price of the drink, before standing up. "See you again, Faith." He walked out, leaving Faith standing there, her mind swirling, caught between fear and curiosity. She had no idea that this moment was the beginning of a series of events that would change her entire life. That afternoon, as she picked Lily up from school, Faith took the long way home, hoping to see David again. He was there, sitting on the steps, his old blanket draped over his shoulders, his eyes lighting up when he saw Faith and Lily approaching. Faith sat down next to him, handing over the bundle of bread. "It's cold today. I thought you might need a little more to keep warm." David took it, looking up at Faith, his eyes soft. "You don't have to do this." Faith shook her head. I want to. He let out a small, sincere laugh. It's been a long time since anyone looked at me like a human being. Faith looked at him, her eyes glistening, then squeezed Lily's hand gently, whispering, "You're not invisible, David. At least, not to us." David was quiet for a moment before softly saying, "Thank you, Faith." As Faith stood up, Lily stepped forward, her big eyes looking at David. "Will you be okay?" David looked at the little girl, gently patting her head. "I will be, thanks to people like you and your mom." Faith's eyes burned as she watched Lily's bright smile, the afternoon sun lighting up her brown hair, making it glow in the light. That night, Faith stayed up later than usual, sitting by the window, watching the city lights shimmer. Why does Matthew know me? Why has he been watching me? And how is he connected to David? The questions swirled in her mind, but then she looked over at Lily, sleeping soundly, clutching the old, frayed teddy bear, a small smile on her lips as she dreamed. Faith smiled softly, brushing back Lily's hair, telling herself, "Tomorrow, I'll bring more bread for David." She had no idea that a few streets away, Matthew was sitting in a black car, looking through the window, his eyes serious yet warm. "She's ready," he said. A message popped up on Matthew's phone. "We can begin." Matthew nodded, setting the phone down, his eyes looking out over the city, where Faith was sitting in her small room, holding her daughter, completely unaware that her life was about to take a turn she could never have imagined. The next morning, Faith woke up with a strange feeling, a mix of anxiety and excitement, as if something was waiting for her. She prepared the bread for David, this time with a piece of egg she had saved from dinner the night before, taking less for herself so she could add a bit more protein for him. As Faith wrapped it, her hands paused, gratitude filling her heart that she still had something to share, however small. When Faith arrived at the bus stop, David was already there, his eyes meeting hers as she approached, those deep eyes lighting up with a spark Faith had never seen before. "Good morning, David," Faith smiled, handing him the bundle. David took it, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes steady. "Another day you've brought me something," Faith nodded, "because I want you to know that someone cares." David let out a small laugh, resting his hand on the bundle without opening it yet. He looked at Faith for a long moment, something in his eyes that made Faith take a half step back, her heart racing. "Faith," David spoke softly, his raspy voice low but warm. "If one day you discover that I'm not who you think I am, what will you do?" Faith froze, frowning. "What do you mean?" David looked at her, his eyes reflecting a lifetime of stories. Then he shook his head, smiling. "It's nothing. Just a question." Faith bit her lip, then pulled Lily to sit on the bench. Lily looked at David, smiling brightly. "You look healthier today." David nodded, his eyes softening. "Thanks to you and your mum." That afternoon, when Faith finished work, she stopped by the small grocery store to buy some discounted pasta. As she stepped out, she was startled to see Matthew leaning against a light pole outside, his eyes calm as they met hers. "Faith," Matthew said, his voice deep and steady. "May I buy you a cup of coffee?" Faith clutched her grocery bag tighter, wary. "I'm sorry. I have to pick up my daughter." Matthew nodded. "Then let me give you both a ride home." Faith shook her head. "We can walk. Thank you." Matthew exhaled softly, then pulled a business card from his coat pocket, handing it to Faith. "If one day you need answers, call me." Faith took it, reading the lines, "Matthew Reed, Director of Community Development, Reed Foundation." Faith looked up, her eyes widening. You're with the Reed Foundation." Matthew nodded. "That's right." The Reed Foundation was a large non-profit in the city, known for helping the homeless, orphans, and single mothers. Faith had heard of them before, had seen their logo on food truck deliveries that gave out free meals. Faith's throat tightened, at a loss for words, until Matthew quietly said, "I've been watching you, Faith, because you see what others overlook." That night, Faith sat by the window, the business card in her hand, her mind in turmoil. She thought about David's question that morning, "If one day you find out I'm not who you think I am." David. What connection does he have to Matthew? Faith couldn't sleep, lying awake as rain tapped against the old tin roof, her heart tangled between worry and hope. The next morning, Faith arrived at the bus stop earlier than usual, determined to ask David for the truth, but he wasn't there. Faith sat down, waiting, each minute stretching into what felt like hours. Lily tugged at her mother's hand. "Mommy, I'm sure he'll come." Faith nodded, her hand clutching the bread. Just as they were about to stand up to catch their bus, a grey van pulled up across the street. The door opened and David stepped out, but he no longer looked like a homeless man. He wore a long coat, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed, and clean brown leather shoes on his feet. But most importantly, it was the eyes, those warm, deep eyes, that Faith recognized immediately. Faith stood frozen, Lily's eyes wide as she whispered, "Mommy, is that Mr. David?" David walked closer, stopping in front of Faith, speaking gently. "Faith, I owe you an explanation." Faith's voice caught. You're not homeless." David shook his head, his eyes sad but steady. "I am David Reed, the founder of the Reed Foundation, and I am also Matthew's father." Faith felt the world spin, her hands trembling as the bundle of bread fell onto the cold ground. David bent down, picked up the bread with hands that shook slightly, then placed it back into Faith's hands. "But it's because of you that I remembered why I started the Reed Foundation in the first place." In that moment, Faith realized that everything she had done, sharing part of her bread, offering a smile, meeting someone's eyes, had created ripples of change in her life and in others' lives in ways she could never have imagined. But she didn't yet know that very morning, David and Matthew were about to give her an offer that would change her destiny forever. Faith stood there in the cold morning breeze, her hands still shaking as she held the bread that David, once a homeless man she had shared food with, was now handing back to her. No longer wrapped in an old blanket, no longer with tangled hair or the familiar smell of mildew, but as a man standing tall, with a determined gaze and a warm, deeply sorrowful smile. David, you're... Faith stammered, her mind spinning. I am David Reed, founder of the Reed Foundation, he said softly, his eyes looking straight into Faith's. And I've lived on the streets, among the people I wanted to help, to truly understand their lives. Faith tightened her grip on Lily's hand, her voice trembling. So, this was all a test. Was I just part of your plan? David looked at Faith, a flicker of sadness crossing his eyes. No, Faith, you were never part of any plan. You are a miracle. Faith stood in silence, her breath quickening, anger and fear rising within her. But then Lily gently squeezed her mother's hand, looking up. Mommy, he's still the Mr. David we gave bread to. Right. Faith looked at her daughter, at Lily's clear, innocent eyes, then turned back to David, her breathing slowing. Yes, no matter who he was still the man who had sat curled beneath the cold shelter, who had taken that small piece of bread from her hand, who had smiled and softly said, "Thank you." David lowered his voice. You did what hundreds of others walked past and never did. You saw me, Faith, not because I'm David Reed, but because I'm a human being. A black car pulled up to the curb, and Matthew Reed stepped out, walking toward them, unable to hide the pride in his eyes as he looked at his father. Faith, Matthew began, now that you know the truth, we would like to invite you for an official meeting at the Reed Foundation. Faith shook her head, stepping back. I don't understand. I'm just a coffee shop worker, a single mom. I don't have a degree. I don't have any special skills. Matthew smiled. You have something no school can teach. Faith, you have empathy and courage. You did the right thing when no one was looking. You gave when you had so little. David continued. We're building a new program at the Reed Foundation, focused on community outreach, on listening to those who need to be heard. We need people like you. Faith shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I can't. I have Lily to take care of. I have my job, the rent, the bills. Matthew gently placed a hand on Faith's shoulder, his voice steady. We will take care of all of that. This position will give you flexible hours to care for Lily. She can join our children's community program. We want Faith, not someone else. Faith squeezed Lily's hand, kneeling down to her level. Sweetheart, what do you think? Lily looked at her mother, smiling. Mommy, if you can help more people, I'll be so proud of you. Faith let out a small laugh through her tears, looking at David, then at Matthew. I need time to think. David nodded, trust shining in his eyes. We'll wait for your answer. Matthew handed Faith an envelope. This has the meeting schedule and program details. If you agree, just come in at 9 a.m. on Monday. Faith held the envelope, her hand trembling slightly, feeling as if she were holding a key to a door she had never dared to dream of opening. That night, Faith sat by the window while Lily slept soundly, the noise of the streetcars below sounding like a distant lullaby. In her hand was the envelope from Matthew, inside a crisp sheet with the Reed Foundation logo, a meeting schedule, and a small quote at the bottom. Kindness is seeing the humanity in others, even when the world teaches you to look away. Faith read it again and again, tears falling onto the paper, smudging the ink. She pressed the paper to her chest, looking over at Lily, and whispered, "Sweetheart, maybe it's time we step through this door." The next morning, Faith packed a bigger portion of bread than usual, no longer saving half for later. She stepped outside, unsure if David would be there, but she carried it anyway because she knew, no matter what happened, she would still be Faith, the woman who saw people who were being forgotten. And this time, she felt she wasn't walking alone anymore. That morning, Faith woke up earlier than usual. She put on her light blue dress, slightly worn, her black shoes with scuffed heels, brushed her hair neatly in front of the cracked mirror, taking a deep breath as she looked at herself. That woman was still Faith, a single mother who once quietly shared half her bread with a stranger. And today, she was about to step through a different door. Lily sat on the bed, her eyes shining. "Mommy, today you're going to interview so you can help more people, right?" Faith nodded, leaning down to kiss her daughter's forehead. "Yes, sweetheart, and I will always remember. The reason I'm doing this is you." The bus rattled through the streets, Faith watching as the old neighborhoods passed by, then wider, cleaner roads as the bus entered the downtown district. The Reed Foundation appeared, a building of glass reflecting the blue sky, the flag with the foundation's logo fluttering in the morning breeze. Faith stepped through the large glass doors, the sunlight reflecting off the polished floors, the scent of coffee and fresh wood filling the air, so different from the damp hallway smells of her apartment building. Her heart pounded as she passed the reception desk, where an attendant smiled and handed her a visitor's badge. "Ms. Faith Morales, they're expecting you on the 15th floor." Faith stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb, her heart a mix of fear and excitement. When the doors opened, Matthew was already waiting, smiling warmly. "Faith, welcome." Faith clutched her bag, nodding, following him down a long hallway lined with black and white photos capturing moments of the homeless receiving blankets, single mothers receiving keys to new apartments, children smiling on their way to school. With each step, Faith felt a part of herself being seen, being heard. They entered a bright glass room where David was already sitting, still the David she knew, only now in a crisp suit, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes as warm and deep as the morning he accepted her small piece of bread. "Faith, please, have a seat," David said. Faith sat down, her hands resting on her lap, trembling slightly. Matthew poured a glass of water, setting it in front of her. "Faith," David began, "at the Reed Foundation, we believe helping the community isn't just about giving material things. It's about truly understanding what people need and treating them with dignity." Faith nodded, letting out a quiet breath. "I understand." David looked at her, his gaze firm. "Today, we're not going to interview you in the traditional sense. We want to hear your story." Faith paused for a moment, looking down at her calloused hands, then lifting her eyes to meet David's, and she began to speak. She spoke of nights working late shifts, of mornings when she had to choose between buying milk for Lily and paying the electric bill, of the fear when the landlord knocked on the door, of the days she had to cut cheese slices in half, of the evenings when Lily would ask, "Mommy, why do you always eat less than me?" She spoke of the moment she first saw David lying under the shelter, of the first time she decided to tear off a piece of her bread and bring it to him. "I don't know why, but I just couldn't walk past him like everyone else," Faith said, her voice trembling, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Because if I didn't see him, then who would?" The meeting room fell silent. Matthew placed a hand on David's shoulder, and David nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "You know, Faith," David said, his deep voice steady, "it's because of you that I looked back at myself. You showed me that kindness doesn't require wealth. It doesn't require abundance. It only requires a heart that refuses to turn away." Faith wiped her tears, taking a deep breath. Matthew sat down across from her. "Faith, we want you to lead a new program at the Reed Foundation to help connect with single-parent families, with the homeless, with those standing on the edge of despair. You will receive training, have a team to support you, and most importantly, you will get to be yourself." Faith was stunned. "But I don't have a degree. I don't have any experience." Matthew smiled. "That's exactly why we chose you. You understand, because you've lived that life." David looked at Faith, his eyes warm. "Faith, are you ready to become an extension of kindness?" Faith looked at them, tears falling again, but this time they were tears of hope. She thought of Lily, of all the nights sitting by the window, drowning in worry. And for the first time, Faith felt the path before her opening up. I'm ready," Faith whispered, her voice breaking but full of determination. David smiled, pride shining in his eyes. Then, "Welcome to the Reed Foundation." Faith. When Faith stepped out of the Reed Foundation building, sunlight touched her face, a gentle breeze brushing past, carrying the scent of flowers from the rows of planters along the street. She knew life would not be easy, but she was no longer alone. She had found a purpose greater than herself, and Lily would grow up seeing her mother as someone who stood up, who believed in kindness. And Faith smiled, walking into the sunlight, carrying David's words in her heart. On Monday morning, Faith stepped into the Reed Foundation with her new employee badge, her heart pounding in her chest, her hand gripping the strap of her old bag. The elevator climbed to the 15th floor, each number lighting up like a drumbeat, bringing her closer to a new chapter she had never dared to dream of. Matthew was waiting in the lobby, smiling. "Faith, welcome officially to the Reed Foundation." Faith exhaled softly, nodding, trying to hide the anxiety in her eyes. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity. This opportunity is one you created for yourself," Matthew replied, gesturing down the hallway lined with photos of smiling community members. "Because no one understands them better than someone who has been in their shoes." Faith's office was a small corner with a light wooden desk, a green plant by the window overlooking the city. On her desk lay a stack of files of those in need of assistance, single mothers, the homeless, families on the verge of eviction. Faith sat down, took a deep breath, and opened the first file, Maria. 34. 2 children, recently laid off, living in a shelter. Faith carefully read each line, picturing Maria's face, seeing the fear in her eyes as she faced the possibility of having no home. That afternoon, Faith went with an employee named Eleanor to the shelter where Maria was staying. The building was cold, the smell of dampness lingering, children playing in the narrow hallways, their laughter mixing with coughs. Faith stepped into Maria's room, a cramped space with 2 metal beds and a tattered curtain over the window. Maria sat holding her young son, looking up with tired eyes when she saw Faith. "Hello, Maria. I'm Faith, from the Reed Foundation," Faith said softly, sitting down at Maria's level, erasing any distance between them. Maria hesitated. "Reed Foundation? I don't know what I need anymore." Faith gently took Maria's hand. "You need hope, and we will start from there." Maria broke down, burying her head on Faith's shoulder, her pain and exhaustion melting into salty tears. And Faith's eyes welled up too as she gently patted Maria's back, whispering, "We will find a way. You are not alone anymore." That evening, Faith returned to her small apartment, Lily running to her, hugging her tightly, showing her a drawing of Faith standing among houses, next to an elderly man with silver hair smiling. "That's Mr. David," Mommy Lily said excitedly. Faith laughed, her eyes tearing up. "It's beautiful, sweetheart." After Lily fell asleep, Faith sat by the window, opening her notebook and writing day 1. "I saw fear in Maria's eyes, the same fear I once had, but I also saw hope when I held her hand, when she realized she no longer had to fight alone. I have begun this journey." Faith closed the notebook, looking out at the city lights. She realized that change did not come from grand gestures, but from holding hands, from looking into someone's eyes and not turning away, from sharing half a loaf of bread. The next day, Faith and Matthew attended a meeting with the senior managers of the Reed Foundation. In the large room filled with people in suits, Faith sat humbly at the corner of the table, but her eyes shone when Matthew spoke. "We are launching the Community Hearts Project, bringing in team members like Faith, who have lived experience, to support families at risk of homelessness. Faith will lead the community outreach team in the Riverside district." The room fell silent. David looked at Faith, his eyes watery, nodding. "Faith is right." Matthew stood up. "I will call the investors. We will negotiate." Faith exhaled, tears falling as she sat down, her hands trembling, but it was the trembling of hope. The following day, Faith attended the meeting with the investor. He was a middle-aged man in a dark suit, his eyes cold. "We've paid for this land. We have the right to build." Faith looked him directly in the eye. "You have rights, but you also have responsibilities to this community." Community, he scoffed. I'm here to do business, not charity. Faith opened her laptop, projecting images of families and children from Riverside. She shared Linda's story, stories of single mothers, of children who needed to attend school close to home. You will build your apartments, but you will lose the community's support, and the press will ask why you are forcing poor families out to increase your profits. The man fell silent, his fingers tapping lightly on the table. Matthew continued, We are not against redevelopment, but we ask that you build some affordable units for the current families or help them find housing before construction begins. The room was heavy with tension. Faith held her gaze steady, clutching the small bracelet Lily had given her the day before. Finally, the man sighed. I will consider it. 3 days later, they received the news. The investor agreed to postpone evictions for 6 months, to partner with the Reed Foundation to create a housing support fund for affected families, and to commit to making 20% of the new units affordable housing. Faith cried when she heard the news, and Matthew gently patted her shoulder. Faith, you did it. David called, his voice emotional. Faith, I am so proud of you. Faith looked out the window, where Lily was playing with other children, her laughter ringing out in the sunlight. She knew this was just the beginning, but she had proven that an ordinary person could create change. And as Faith walked out of the Reed Foundation that day, the afternoon sun lighting up her face, she smiled, knowing her life had entered a new chapter, a chapter of hope, of fighting, and of humanity. On a bright morning, golden sunlight washed over Riverside, children laughing in the yards, mothers hanging clothes on lines, an old man reading the paper on his porch. The neighborhood, once on the verge of being erased, was now repainted, cleaned up, thanks to the efforts of the Reed Foundation and the investment fund. Faith stood in the small alleyway, holding a list of families needing support. The breeze lifted her hair gently as she watched Lily riding a bike with other children, her daughter's laughter bright under the sun. Faith took a deep breath. She remembered the old days, when every penny had to be counted to buy the cheapest loaf of bread, when she watched Lily sleep curled up on the old mattress, crying because she didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She remembered David's eyes, the day he sat under the cold shelter, taking the piece of bread from her hand. She remembered the moment Matthew handed her the chance to walk through the doors of the Reed Foundation, the way he looked at her, not with pity, but with trust. And she remembered herself, a Faith who was once tired, afraid, lost in a cold city, whose only hope was to see her daughter fed and smiling each day. That day, the Reed Foundation held a community meeting in a small hall. Faith stepped up to the podium, looking at over 100 faces, watching her mothers, children, elders, people who had once felt afraid, invisible in this world. Faith held the microphone, her voice trembling softly. I stand here today, not because I am special, not because I am better than anyone. I stand here because I was once one of you. She paused, tears in her eyes. I used to fear the knock on the door in the middle of the night, used to tremble when I received an eviction notice, used to worry if I could buy milk for my daughter the next day. She looked down into the crowd, seeing Linda holding her child, Maria nodding at her, Lily waving and smiling at her mother. But I have also learned that we are not invisible. We are not powerless. We deserve to be heard. We deserve to be loved, supported, and given the chance to start again. Faith held up the paper outlining the new program. We will continue building affordable housing, emergency support funds, and job training programs because we believe you deserve not just a place to live, but hope and a chance to begin again. The hall erupted in applause, with muffled sobs and eyes shining with hope. Faith placed her hand on her heart. Never believe that your kindness means nothing. A loaf of bread, a smile, a simple, "Are you okay?" can change someone's life. As Faith stepped down, David approached, his eyes misty. Faith, you have become the person the Reed Foundation always needed. Not the best person, but the right one. Matthew stepped forward, placing a hand on Faith's shoulder. You have changed many lives, but most importantly, you've shown them that they are worthy of love. Faith looked at them, then turned to see Lily running toward her, hugging her tightly, her little voice chirping, "Mommy, I'm so proud of you." Faith held Lily close, tears falling into her daughter's soft hair, whispering, "And I am so proud of you, my princess." That night, Faith sat by the window of her small but neat apartment, watching the city lights flicker, Lily sleeping peacefully beside her, her face calm. She opened her old notebook, once filled with lists of debts, unpaid bills, and the fears she carried for so many years. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "Today, I changed someone's life, and I will continue." Faith set down her pen, closing her eyes, letting tears fall, not tears of fear or despair, but tears of hope. Because Faith knew that if an ordinary person like her could make a difference, then anyone could. And as she drifted off to sleep, Faith knew that tomorrow she would stand up again, continue to fight, continue to look injustice in the eye, and continue to choose kindness.